The night my best friend got married, I sat alone at a table full of strangers and tried very hard not to cry into my champagne. That sounds dramatic. It was dramatic. The whole evening was soaked in tulle and string lights, and the kind of orchestrated joy that makes you painfully aware of everything missing from your own life. Brooke looked radiant. She always did, and her new husband couldn't take his eyes off her. The kind of love story people write songs about. I was genuinely happy for her. I was also, if I'm being completely honest, falling apart quietly in the corner. I'd come alone because I'd assumed my boyfriend of 2 years would come with me. Except 3 weeks before the wedding, Kevin decided he needed to figure some things out, which turned out to mean moving in with a woman he'd met at his CrossFit gym. I found out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I'd already told Brooke I was still coming solo, and it was fine, totally fine. I was absolutely fine. I was not fine. The table I was assigned to sat 8 people. 4 of them were couples who'd apparently known each other since college and spent the entire cocktail hour reliving inside jokes I had no access to. The other 2 were Brooke's distant relatives who spoke primarily to each other in Polish. So I smiled when it felt appropriate and sipped my drink and counted the centerpiece flowers. 14 white peonies per vase, which felt like too many, and reminded myself that I would be home by 11 in my pajamas and none of this would matter. Then someone sat down beside me, not across from me, not at the empty chair 2 seats down. Right next to me, in the chair that had been empty all night, close enough that I could smell him before I registered what was happening. Something dark and clean, cedar and something I couldn't name. I turned, expecting one of the college friends who'd wandered back from the bar. He wasn't one of the college friends. He was the kind of man who made you recalibrate the room. Not because he was trying to. That was the thing that got me first. There was nothing performative about him. He wore a black suit like he'd been born in it, no tie, top button open, and he was looking at the dance floor with an expression I recognized immediately because I'd been wearing the same one all night. Slightly removed, slightly wary, watchful. "You've been counting those flowers for the last 10 minutes, he said, without looking at me. I blinked. 14, per vase, in case you were wondering. That made him turn. He had dark eyes, the kind that took a moment to read. A faint scar along his jaw that looked old. He looked at me the way people look at something unexpected. Not rude, just genuinely surprised. "I wasn't," he said. "But now I am." I didn't know who he was. I knew practically everyone at this wedding through Brooke, and I'd never seen this man in my life. Which was strange, because Brooke had exactly the kind of friend group that would have mentioned him. "Are you on the bride's side or the groom's?" I asked. "Neither." He picked up his water glass, which had apparently been sitting there the whole time. "Business associate of the groom's father. I was in town. I got invited. I almost didn't come." "Same," I said. He glanced at me. "You almost didn't come to your best friend's wedding." "I almost didn't survive coming to my best friend's wedding. There's a difference." Something shifted in his expression, not pity. I would have closed up immediately if it were pity. More like recognition. He nodded once, slowly, and looked back at the dance floor where Brooke and her husband were swaying to something acoustic and lovely. "I'm Weston," he said. "Lena." We didn't shake hands. It would have felt strange. We just sat there for a moment in the particular silence of 2 people who both understand they are somewhere they are barely managing to be. "How long do you have to stay?" he asked. "First dance, cake, bouquet toss. Then I'm free." "What if I told you I needed someone to talk to for the next 45 minutes, and you were the only person at this wedding who looked remotely capable of a real conversation?" I looked at him. He wasn't flirting. Or if he was, it was the least aggressive version of flirting I'd ever encountered. He said it like a proposition, honest and direct. "I'd say you have very low standards," I said. "I have extremely high standards." He reached over and picked up the small card with his table number, turned it over. Which is exactly why I walked over here instead of sitting over there with 4 couples who are going to spend the next hour talking about refinancing. Despite everything, despite Kevin and the peonies and the 2 glasses of champagne on an empty stomach, I laughed. It was a real laugh, not a social one, the kind that catches you off guard. Weston looked at me like he'd done something he hadn't quite expected to do. There it is, he said quietly. There what is? Nothing. He picked up his water glass again. Tell me something true. Excuse me? Tell me something true, he repeated. About tonight. About why you're sitting in the corner counting flowers instead of dancing. I should have deflected. I'm good at deflecting. I've had years of practice wrapping my actual feelings in enough layers of humor that people think I'm doing fine when I'm very much not doing fine. But there was something about the way he asked, direct, unperformative, like he actually wanted to know. That made me answer honestly. My boyfriend and I broke up 3 weeks ago, I said. I was supposed to come with him. I didn't want anyone here to know, so I've been performing totally okay for the last 4 hours and I'm exhausted. Weston was quiet for a moment. How long were you together? 2 years. Did you love him? The question surprised me. Most people ask what happened, who ended it, whether we're still in touch. Nobody asks that particular question, the one that actually matters. I thought I did, I said. Now I think I loved the version of the future I'd constructed around him. That's different. He looked at me for a long moment. Yes, he said. It is. Something in his tone made me think he knew exactly what that felt like, from the inside. We talked through the first dance. We talked through cake cutting, somewhere around the bouquet toss, which I strategically avoided by visiting the restroom. He ordered us both actual food from the past appetizers, because neither of us had eaten properly. And we sat at that corner table eating tiny crab cakes and talking about things I hadn't talked about with anyone in months. He asked good questions. Not interview questions, real ones, the kind that come from actual curiosity. He asked what I did for work. Hospital administration, which sounds boring and is occasionally very boring, but I told him the one story about the Christmas Eve scheduling crisis that always makes people laugh, and it made him laugh, which felt like an achievement. He asked where I grew up. He asked what I was afraid of. I told him quiet apartments. He didn't ask me to explain, and I didn't explain. But somehow that was its own answer. I asked him what he did. He paused, not an evasive pause, more like he was choosing how to describe it. Finance, he said. Private equity. We acquire companies, restructure them, either grow them or dissolve them depending on what makes sense. That sounds like a lot of power over a lot of people. It is, he said without flinching. I try not to forget that. I believed him. That was the strange part. I believed him. Around 9:30, the DJ shifted into something loud and unavoidable, and Brooke materialized at my elbow in a cloud of ivory silk, grabbing my hands with the particular energy of a bride who has consumed exactly the right amount of champagne. Lena, you have to dance. You've been sitting here all night. She stopped, looked at Weston, looked back at me. Her eyes went wide in a way she was absolutely not subtle about. Brooke, I said, this is Weston. He works with your father-in-law. Weston. She extended her hand and shook it with the solemnity of a senator. I've never heard of you. That's fairly common, he said. He seemed genuinely amused by her. Brooke looked at me with an expression that communicated approximately 9,000 things in under 2 seconds, then got pulled back toward the dance floor by her new husband, leaving a wake of perfume and implication behind her. She seems like someone who made the right choice, Weston said, watching the dance floor. She is, I said. She always was. Even when we were 23 and making terrible decisions, she was making slightly less terrible ones. What was your most terrible decision at 23? Dropping out of a nursing program to follow a boyfriend to Portland. Did Portland work out? The boyfriend did not. I missed nursing school and ended up in healthcare-adjacent work, so it wasn't a total loss, but I shook my head. Choice. He nodded, not judging, just filing it. We stayed until 10, then 10:30. At some point, the corner table became the only place at this wedding where I actually wanted to be, which was something I hadn't expected when I'd pulled on this dress 4 hours ago and given myself a sternly worded pep talk in the bathroom mirror. When the lights shifted toward last call dimness, I reached for my clutch. I should find Brooke, I said. Say goodbye properly. Weston stood when I stood, which I noticed, because nobody really does that anymore, and it caught me off guard. Where are you parked? He asked. I took an Uber. My apartment's about 20 minutes from here. He was quiet for a moment. I have a car. I can have my driver take you. I looked at him. You have a driver. It's not as impressive as it sounds. I don't like driving in cities. It's exactly as impressive as it sounds, I said. And no, thank you. I'm fine. I know you're fine, he said. I'm not offering because I think you can't manage it. I'm offering because it's late and because I'd like this conversation to continue for another 20 minutes. I stood there holding my clutch, trying to figure out what to do with that. The honest answer was that I didn't want to go home yet, either. The apartment was going to be quiet in exactly the way I'd told him I was afraid of, and the thought of walking back into that silence with all of this evening's feelings still fully loaded made my chest feel heavy in a particular way. 20 minutes, I said. He nodded and took out his phone. The car was black and quiet and warm. We sat in the back with a foot of space between us, and I watched the city light streak by outside the window, and Weston asked me what I'd wanted to be when I was a kid. An archaeologist, I said immediately. I was obsessed with ancient Egypt. Had a whole phase. What happened to it? I found out archaeologists mostly work in the rain, documenting things in spreadsheets, and the glamorous discovery part is about 3% of the job. Describes most jobs. What did you want to be? He thought about this. Actually thought about it, which surprised me. A carpenter, he said. I turned. Really? My grandfather had a workshop. I spent every summer there until I was 15. I can still build a bookshelf faster than most people order one online. Why didn't you? He glanced at me. There was something in his expression I couldn't entirely read, old and complicated, the kind of story that doesn't reduce to a 2-minute answer. Family, he said. Expectation. The usual machinery. I understood that, more than I probably let on. We pulled up outside my building, a 6-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was half gentrified and half still genuinely itself, which was something I loved about it. The streetlight made everything amber and a little soft. I should have just said goodnight. Everything about the situation said just say goodnight, Lena. You can build a bookshelf, I said instead. He looked at me. I have 3 milk crates currently functioning as bookshelves, I said, which is fine. I'm an adult, it's a choice. But if you ever wanted to. I stopped. That was an absurd thing to say. Forget I said it. I don't want to forget you said it. The car was very quiet. Lena. His voice was different, careful in a way it hadn't been all evening. I don't know what this is. I'm not someone who... He stopped, tried again. I travel constantly. My life isn't particularly conducive to things. I know, I said. Mine's not exactly simple either right now. I'm aware. He looked at me steadily. Which is why I want to tell you something, and I'd like you to hear it as sincerely as it's intended. I waited. Tonight was the first time in a long time I've sat somewhere and not wanted to leave. He said, that matters to me, even if I don't know what to do with it. I looked at him for a moment. The streetlight, the quiet car, the thing sitting in the air between us that didn't have a name yet. Give me your phone, I said. He handed it over without hesitation. I typed in my number and handed it back. No pressure, I said. No expectations. But if you're in the city again and you want to talk to the only person at that wedding who was counting flowers. I reached for the door handle. You know where to find me. I didn't look back when I got out. I'd learned that much from the Portland situation. The apartment was quiet when I got in, the way I'd been dreading all evening. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, in my dress and my heels and my very complicated feelings. And then I put the kettle on and sat at the counter and let myself just be in it for a while. The strange mix of sad and grateful and confused and something else I didn't have a word for yet. My phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number. Confirmed. You have exactly 14 peonies per vase in your apartment as well. You don't, but you would have counted if you did. I laughed. Alone in my kitchen, past midnight, still in my wedding guest dress. I saved the number. That was 3 months ago. I want to be careful about how I tell the rest of this, because the easy version is the romantic version, and the easy version leaves out all the parts that were actually hard. Weston was not an easy person to know. He was private in ways that took time to understand, not secretive, exactly. More like someone who'd spent so long being required to be a certain thing in certain rooms that he'd forgotten how to simply be elsewhere. He'd text for days and then go quiet for a week, and I'd sit with my phone, wondering if I'd misread the whole thing. And then he'd resurface from somewhere. Denver, sometimes, or Charlotte. or once very memorably from a layover in Dallas at 11 at night. And it would feel like the thread between us had just been sitting there the whole time, unbroken. He came back to the city in October. He called instead of texting, which surprised me, and asked if I wanted to get dinner. We went to a Thai place in my neighborhood that I'd been going to for years, small and bright and completely unglamorous. And I'd expected him to seem out of place in it, but he didn't. He ordered the same level of spice I did and ate the whole thing, and told me about a company he just walked away from a deal on because the numbers added up but something felt wrong. What felt wrong? I asked. The way the CEO talked about his employees, he said. Like variables, not people. I set down my fork. So you just walked away from a deal that size. There'll be other deals. He looked at me, steadily. There won't be other reasons to feel good about how I spent my time. I thought about that for a long time after. We walked after dinner. The city in October has a particular quality. The light goes earlier, and the air gets that first edge of cold, and people walk a little faster, and the whole thing feels more urgent, like the world is reminding you it won't wait. We ended up on a bridge over the river I'd crossed 1,000 times and never really stopped on, looking at the skyline, and Weston stood close enough that our arms were touching. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? This. He gestured vaguely between us, letting someone in. I've been told. He paused. I've been told I'm better at acquiring things than keeping them. I thought about who had told him that, whether it was said cruelly or just honestly, and how long he'd been carrying it. I'm not a thing to acquire, I said. I know. He turned to look at me. That's what makes it different. Standing on that bridge in October, I understood something. He wasn't offering me easy. He wasn't offering me uncomplicated. What he was offering was something rarer and harder. Himself. Actually himself. In whatever partial and uncertain and still learning way that looked like. I'd settled for easy before. I knew exactly where that ended up. I'm also not going to be a variable, I said. In any equation. I need you to know that up front. I know. I mean it. If I'm in this, I'm a person. I have bad weeks and opinions about things, and I will absolutely call you out when you go quiet for 10 days without explanation. Something moved across his face that might have been the closest thing he had to relief. I know, he said again. I'm counting on it. The thing about falling for someone who's learned to be guarded is that you get to see the moment they decide to stop. It's not dramatic, usually. It's small. The first time he mentioned his grandfather without prompting, telling me a whole story about a rocking chair they built together, over one summer. And I could hear what that man had meant to him in every detail. The first time he called me on a random Tuesday. Not because anything had happened, but just because he'd heard a song that reminded him of something I'd said. The first time he looked at me across a room full of people and didn't look away. Months in, I met his work, or the edges of it. I understood gradually that what Weston did was significant in ways that most people never see. Not flashy. Not the private jet and champagne version of wealth, though the resources were real. More like the kind of power that moves quietly and makes large decisions and bears that weight without advertise. He didn't talk about it constantly, but I could see it in the way rooms shifted when he walked in. The way his phone never really stopped. I asked him once, late at night in my apartment, the one where the bookshelves were now actual bookshelves. Built over one Sunday in November, when he'd shown up with lumber and a level, and spent 4 hours making something real, whether it ever felt like too much. He was quiet for a while. He does that, sits with things before he answers, and I've learned to just let the silence be instead of filling it. When I was 22, he said, my father told me that the only thing worse than inheriting power was being too cowardly to use it for something good. I've been trying to figure out what something good means for about 15 years. And I think it might be smaller than I thought, he said. The equation. I think it might be not walking away from deals that compromise people, giving money to things that actually matter, building someone bookshelves when they need bookshelves. He looked at me, being honest with someone even when honest is uncomfortable. I reached over and took his hand. He looked down at our hands like it was still something he was learning to accept. The simplicity of it, the uncomplicated warmth, Like someone who'd been in the cold for a long time stepping into a room that was just warm and finding it almost overwhelming. "You're good at this," I told him, "in case nobody's told you." "I'm learning," he said. "That's different." "It's not that different." In February, after a particularly brutal week at the hospital where I'd handled a staffing crisis that had left me running on coffee and stubbornness for 4 straight days, I came home to find a note slid under my door. Not a text, an actual handwritten note on cardstock, which was so distinctly him it made my throat tighten before I even read it. "You said once that you were afraid of quiet apartments. I want you to know that from my end, whatever this is, whatever distance there is between us on any given day, the line doesn't go quiet. You're not alone in that apartment. You're just in a different room. I'm working on getting better at saying things out loud. This is practice." I sat on my kitchen floor, in my work clothes, back against the cabinet, and read it twice. Then I picked up my phone. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "Hey." My voice wasn't entirely steady. "I got your note." A pause. "Too much?" "No," I said. It was exactly enough. I could hear him exhale, careful and quiet, the particular sound of someone who'd been holding something without realizing it. "I'm in Boston until Friday," he said. "But I could come here Friday," I said. "I'll cook. Something that'll actually require 2 people to eat it. I'll be there." Spring happened the way it always does in this city. Sudden and tentative, crocuses in the concrete cracks, everyone slightly disbelieving that winter actually ended. I'd started looking forward in a way I hadn't in years. Planning things more than 1 week ahead. Making room in my apartment in small ways that I'd tell myself were just practical and knew were not just practical. One evening in April, we were walking through my neighborhood after dinner when he stopped outside a building I passed every day. An old converted warehouse, brick, big windows, the kind that floods with afternoon light. "There's a unit in that building," he said. "That's been on the market for 3 months. I looked at him. "Are you buying property in my neighborhood?" "I'm thinking about it." He looked up at the building. "I'm thinking about what it might mean to be somewhere, consistently, instead of in transit." He glanced at me. "I'd want to know what you think about that." Standing on that sidewalk in April, with the evening light going gold, and the particular smell of the city in spring all around us, I understood that this was the question underneath the question. Not about the apartment, about whether I was a reason to stay somewhere, about whether this, us, the thing we'd been building in texts and dinners and bookshelves and handwritten notes, was something to build a life around. I'd been afraid of this, afraid of wanting it and having it disappear, afraid of making space for someone and being left with the absence of them. But standing there, I thought about what I'd said to Brooke on her wedding day before all of it started. That I didn't believe in coincidence, but I believed in the kind of moments that pivot your life if you're paying attention. I'd been paying attention all along. "I think," I said slowly, "that the light in those units is probably incredible in the morning." He looked at me. "And I think," I continued, "that someone who can build a bookshelf shouldn't have any trouble with the other furniture." Something shifted in his expression. Open and unguarded, in the way I'd come to understand, was the realist version of him, the one that took a long time to earn. "Lena, I'm not saying it'll be simple," I said. "I know your life. I know mine." Simple was never on the table. "No," he agreed. "But it could be real." "Yeah," I said. "It could be real." He reached over and took my hand the way he'd learned to. Easy now, unself-conscious, like something that just belonged there. We stood there on the sidewalk for a while, in the April evening, not saying anything else because we didn't need to. The city moved around us, full of its usual noise and hurry and oblivious momentum, and we just stood in it. I'd arrived at my best friend's wedding in February a year ago, certain that I was the person things happened to, the one who made the wrong choice and showed up alone and counted flowers to keep from falling apart. I'm learning that the story you tell yourself about your own life is the most powerful thing you have, and the most dangerous when you get it wrong. I was never just the woman sitting alone in the corner. I was just someone who hadn't met the right person to sit with yet.